And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to the first episode of season 1, or season 4, the first episode of season 4 of the Neurodiversity Gold podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I'm really excited by this, and I want to start off with a little bit of an announcement that this is the way Neurodiversity Gold podcast will go from now on, is that it will be live streamed every Friday, hopefully as much as possible. We're working around our guests live stream on YouTube. We want to have it interactive. We want to have people coming in, asking us questions, getting involved in the chat and in the conversation. And then afterward, the podcast will be distributed on all the usual podcast networks. We haven't been on air now for over a year. And this season has taken a lot of planning, a lot of love, a lot of preparation, a lot of technical difficulties, a lot of tantrums, a lot of everything else. And what I want to say is thank you so much to everybody that has been asking questions and has been waiting so patiently for the show to come back. Please know this, your Uncle Jude loves you. I've been really trying to get this on and get it live and get it going. So we are here now, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe on the @Neurodiversity YouTube channel, where you can catch up with us, get updates on all our regular shows, submit questions for guests, and everything else. So we are starting small, but eventually we will snowball like the last series, 3 series of Neurodiversity Gold did. So thank you to everybody for being with us at every stage of the journey. Thank you for constantly asking us when we're getting back up and running, and I'm delighted to answer and say it is right now. And of course, as far as sourcing guests, it's normally the easy route to source guests from nearby, so that are local and stuff like that to get it going. And I said, oh no, we need to go far away. We need to go far away for our first guest of the show. And our first guest of the show for season 4, episode 1, is the Neurodivergent OT, which is Claire Britton. So Claire, thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, what I want to ask everybody at the top of the show is that if people are listening to this afterward and people are so disappointed that they didn't get to come live and ask questions, how can people reach you? Where can people find you? Where do you hang out?
The best place is probably Instagram, so at the Neurodivergent OT Instagram. I also have a Facebook group, and then I also have LinkedIn. So they're probably the best places, yeah.
Absolutely lovely. So as far as Claire Britton, give an introduction. Who is Claire Britton?
I am an Aussie, if you can't tell from my accent. I am a mum of 2 boys. I am a wife. I am also obviously an occupational therapist. I have 8 years of experience, and I'm also neurodivergent myself. So I've got a fun concoction of labels within that, including autism, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, depression. So yeah, I think it's I've got quite a well-rounded experience personally and professionally in terms of labels and diagnoses. I'm currently the national team leader for pediatric OT at Concentric in Australia. And I obviously run an Instagram as well, where I share free resources and information to neurodivergent people and people within the neurodivergent community, whether it be family members or educators or other therapists. So that's something I'm really passionate about.
Excellent. And a lot of people ask about occupational therapy. I think everybody knows what occupational therapy is as a term, but how does occupational therapy help neurodivergent kids and even adults?
Yeah, so we work across the lifespan, and basically it's any activity that you do to occupy your time, we can support. So any difficulties specifically with a task, sometimes a task might be something as small as brushing your teeth. It could be as complex as maintaining employment, and everything in between. Sometimes we help people ride horses, and sometimes we help people go fishing. It's very big in terms of a spectrum. And there's a lot of crossovers with lots of other allied health, but the main difference for us as occupational therapists is we really focus on the activity. So when we're talking about goals and what you want to work on, we actually want to, rather than work on the skills, which is great, we want it to be explicit to the activities that you need and want to do.
Lovely. Well, I just want to circle back on something quickly at the risk of getting sidetracked. So you can teach kids and adults to go horseback riding and fishing and stuff like that. Why the hell didn't I have OTs like that whenever I was a child?
I know, it's amazing the amount of times that I have an initial session and I'm like, what do you want to do with your time? And they're like, no one's asked me this. Like, I'm just playing video games at home. Like, I didn't even think that I could do anything else. Like, I don't really have friends to play with, or I don't really have like people to socialize with except for online. So I just game all the time. I'm like, cool. Well, is there anything you've thought of? And, I had an adult client who was like, I'd love to go paintballing. I was like, perfect. I am going to help you go paintballing. And, we worked over the sensory aspects and the sensory challenges of, wearing the equipment and figuring out like the social cues. Like, are they going to shoot me? Are they not going to shoot me? And had an absolute blast. It's so awesome.
That I'm actually quite speechless, and it doesn't. It normally takes a lot for me to be left speechless, but it seems as if whether it's you as an individual or the health and social care model down under seems to get it right, because whenever I think of OT now, in a lot of situations, it's like somebody coming to the house to try and make someone tie their shoes for hours and hours and hours a day, and figuring out like buttons and clothes. Of course, that's a part of it, like executive function and coordination. But so you have helped kids and adults go paintballing.
Yeah, for sure. I've done archery. It's literally any activity. I've helped people get on airplanes. Some people have family overseas and they're just so anxious they aren't even, board an airplane or even go to the airport. We often go shopping. We do a lot of shopping, which is pretty fun. And it's just around kind of having someone to do it with and having someone to talk them through the processes and really normalize a lot of the challenges, because with especially being neurodivergent, so much of it is internal. And therefore, we kind of gaslight ourselves and we think that, we kind of go through these catastrophizing thoughts and manifest the problem to become bigger and bigger and bigger until we don't do it. So to have an external person who can actually really problem solve in the moment and provide that feedback of, no, you're really capable of going to the shop. You're really capable of creating a list. But when I think of something like going to the shop, I don't even know where to start because I'm a neurodivergent person. So it really helps to have someone that is external and can provide that support. Because if we can do activities in our day that bring us joy, that is therapeutic in itself. Whereas tying your shoelace, as helpful as that may be, is that actually adding to your quality of life? For some, sure. For others, not so much. They'd much rather pay for someone to come and tie their shoelaces, knowing that they can independently go and ride a quad bike, because that's what brings them joy.
Yeah, focusing on things that bring people joy. You would think it goes without saying, and helping people to enjoy the things that they love and enjoy, rather than trying to teach arbitrary skills like trying to tie shoelaces whenever there are things like Velcro shoes or slip-ons. But I am not bitter. Now, beforehand, you talked about labels. Now, this is the purpose of this discussion. And as a neurodivergent, I hear a lot of infuriating things. And the infuriating things sound like, wow, Jude, you don't look autistic. No, wow, Jude, you go skydiving in your free time. That's not really a neurodivergent thing, is it? Or we're all a little bit autistic, aren't we? But here's one that ranks either in the top 1 or 2 of that list of inadvertently ableist things. You will get this, as I certainly do, where you become known for talking about neurodivergency related stuff. And they say something like, well, I think I might be, or my child might be, but I don't want to put a label on it. What do you respond to that?
I say we've tried that. We've tried that for decades and decades and decades. And where has that got us? 80% of neurodivergent people that are diagnosed have coexisting mental health issues. And if you look at the statistics, it doesn't make any sense, because we know that people who have ADHD, for example, have a 20-year difference in lifespan compared to people who don't have ADHD. And most of the time, it's due to not having the right access to supports and the right diagnosis. And in order to get those things, we definitely need that earlier. The earlier, the better. And so we really need to promote the understanding of ourselves. And, we're slowly getting there, slowly but surely. We're identifying that each person is an expert on themselves, rather than going to an external provider to be like told, what do you think this is? You've met me for 5 minutes. Please label my life for me. what we're finding is people are coming in very informed with lots of information about themselves, lots of, historical data, whether that be school reports, whether that be friends reports, and they're providing some really great insights. And it's actually a process of fulfillment and relief rather than shame and guilt. And I think a lot of the neurotypicals in our society that don't really understand the deficits that we face as neurodivergent people, because it's invisible, like you can just do it, right? Just get on with it. Why are we talking about this? Like, you did this yesterday, but there's the executive functioning difference. And just because I look like a duck on top of water doesn't take away from the fact that my little webbed feet are going so fast. And instead of seeing the whole duck and being like, you're doing a really great job, but it is really hard for you. And no wonder you can't sustain it right now. You need more support. We're going, you're a duck, you're fine. You're floating on the water. Like, get on with it. You look like you're doing a great job. Pat you on the back. And as a society, we're starting to like talk about things like you often see like the iceberg analogy, where like the top of the iceberg is like what people see, and then the under the water is the more complex, nuanced things. And I think it's really interesting as a society that we've gone from don't label, everything's taboo, hush hush, it's all about how you're perceived. That's the most important thing. To realizing that's not actually helping anybody. It's exhausting masking. The side effects of masking long term is so significant on our mental health, on our social well-being, on our sense of self. It's actually not worth it. And so for years and years and years, we were looking at, psychiatrists as the experts, and these psychiatrists that have studied for years and years and years provide this amazing insight from their clinical experience. But in that time, we weren't valuing lived experience, and no one was actually providing a voice to neurodivergent people like you do, Jude. Like, you provide, this kind of forum where we're hearing directly from neurodivergent people. Whereas before these types of things even existed, we'd have to do research, which was like a single case study. And even when a single case study came out, people were like, oh, sample size is too small. I wouldn't trust that person's opinion. And it's like, okay, but we're going to trust this psychiatrist who's never been autistic a day in his life and has no awareness that they potentially are also on, may have some neurodivergence. But I think it's really important to look at it from a big picture and be a lot more holistic. Is it just a label, or is there a lot more to it in terms of what that means for us as people?
Of course, there's way, way more to it, because it's an identity, and this is something that in every stage show I do, every podcast, any excuse I get to say this, I always say it, and long-term listeners know exactly what I'm going to say, is if I was to eradicate a misconception from anything to do with neurodivergence, is that autistic and ADHD kids in particular have no understanding of the world around them, or a lesser understanding of self and identity. Because I certainly felt this when I was young. I don't know about you. I certainly did. Even from the age of 5 or 6 years old, I asked myself, why am I different? Why am I not like these other people who like getting their clothes dirty, who like running about, who like shouting in each other's faces, who like holding each other's hands all the time, who like, and everything else. That's the way I was. And of course, 25 years ago, there was a lot more stigma attached to it. But that seems to be the experience of a lot of people, is why am I different? And knowing, for in the context of the conversation, the label and the reason why is important. But as you said, it's a lot more than a label. It's an identity, where it's, why am I different and who am I? Because asking that who am I question for me wasn't properly fully answered until I was maybe around 25 or 26. Now, I don't know about you, but growing up, certainly you probably had way, way more disadvantages, because I suppose was picked up early on because I'm a white male. which is what the research or lack of research seemed to indicate. But did you ask yourself that question when you were younger? Why am I different? Why am I not like these odd people?
Yeah, 100%, of course. And because we then, the few times that we may actually externalize it, feel brave enough to ask the questions of, say, our parents or our loved ones, we kind of get gaslit. Oh, that's just your personality. Or you're just shy. Or you just, it's just your environment. Or it's just because it's a new school. There's so many excuses. And so you internalize that. You go, okay, great. Well, this person, who knows me really well has said that actually I'm fine. So I'm going to just expect myself to be better, to stop being lazy, to get motivated. But instead, I'm actually just creating a really harsh inner critic, and I'm now beating myself up even worse than what I was previously, because instead of being curious as to why something is so complicated for me but seems so simple for everybody else, I think back and I'm like, oh my goodness, I am a horrible person. I am broken. I am not good for society. And that quickly spirals into like this helplessness, which we know is coexisting with mental health challenges and is really detrimental. Whereas if we're able to identify this is a challenge because of the way your brain is neurologically structured. We chuck people in fMRI machines and we see the parts of their brains that light up and that work in different ways. That's concrete. That information we can't argue. We know for a fact that neurodivergent people have smaller gray and white matter in parts of their brain, such as the executive functioning areas. So we know that makes sense because we typically have differences and difficulties in those areas. So whether people want to argue if it's worth a label or not, it's really interesting because when we don't label it, unfortunately, the labels we do end up using are things like weird, horrible, bad, broken. And that actually is so much more detrimental than using the word disabled, autistic, ADHD. Because when someone says they're autistic, they're ADHD, especially, from my personal experience, me identifying with those things, it's really validating when you find someone else, because all of a sudden you don't have to over explain everything you're doing. Like, don't mind me, I'm just fidgeting. Don't mind me, I just need to move around a lot. Whereas if I just say, yeah, I'm autistic, yeah, I'm ADHD, people will just go, okay, great. You do what you need to do to regulate. Like, good on you. And then we can move on. We don't actually need to spend years talking about it. We don't need to be expecting X, Y, Z. We're able to kind of be our authentic self and be unapologetically us and take it or leave it kind of thing. And that is where, the benefits of our health are.
I just wanted to bring up a comment from Kate Hoyle. Why am I different is the most common question for all my neurodivergent clients, usually felt from when they first went to nursery. And I completely concur with that, where I actually wrote about it in my first book, where it's like, I'm not like these people. And I, like many others, whenever it comes to not wanting to put a label on it, I would never judge my parents, because talking about autism and ADHD and stuff like that in the 90s, it just wasn't the done thing. But what happens today, as what happened with me all those years ago, is that a label is not affixed, or an identity is not affixed, then we will do that to ourselves. Am I different because I'm stupid? Am I different because I'm unlovable? Am I different because, as you say, broken? That I'm not like all of these other people? Where I can see completely from the parental side of it, I don't want to put a label on it. But I suppose what I would love the outcome of this conversation to be, for anybody listening to it, is that it's not a label, it is an identity. Because not knowing one's identity crises are very, very common in mental health. It's very common. And as far as the stigma, do you think that the stigma, as far as labels, is getting lesser, or the stigma is increasing?
It's definitely becoming less. 100% it's becoming less. And we see that in the growing number of people that are actually gaining a diagnosis now. We're gone are the days where you had to kind of get lots of reports to prove that it was even worth going and getting assessed. It's now less people in crisis are now getting assessed. And we're being more proactive with our healthcare, We're saying, okay, I've identified that social interactions are really exhausting for me. I can do it. I can interact and I enjoy socializing, but it does take me a few days to relax and decompress. Oh, I'm noticing that I can't stand wool because it itches on my skin and makes me feel really uncomfortable. But that seems really odd compared to other people I talk to. So we have the accessibility of the information that really benefits us to gain as much information as possible prior to the diagnosis. And when I was working in a diagnostic clinic, as an OT, we typically don't diagnose. I just want to put that out there. But within a multidisciplinary team, we 100% can provide a really comprehensive, holistic assessment, especially from like a sensory perspective. But it's really important to kind of get that whole picture. I'm so sorry, I've lost my train of thought. In terms of what we're talking
about. You know what? That's okay, because I kind of forgot the question as well. But what I'll do is we'll ride the crest of the wave of the point, and there's more people being diagnosed, and to the untrained eye or ear, people are seemingly thinking over the last 5 to 10 years there is a neurodivergency epidemic. That's what people think, and that's where it gets scary. Now, this is a double-edged sword, is that, yes, it's a positive thing that stigma is reducing, but sometimes whenever one stigma seems to go, they bring another one in, because I want to have this as a recurring theme through all these live streams and all these episodes, is that there is not a neurodivergency epidemic, where people are asking questions like, why is everybody coming forward as autistic and ADHD? And I'm not sure if it was you that put this up or it was another wonderful neurodivergent creator.
No, it was me. I'll certainly take credit.
In Australia, yeah, take credit for this. Is that
it was me? No, you can share it.
Diagnostics of autism and ADHD under the DSM could not be delivered until, was it 2013?
Yeah, 2013. So, and typically what we see in research is it takes 10 years from research and from the implementation of, say, a DSM to actually be put into practice. So people were told you can't have both, you have to pick one. And I know, especially in Australia, ADHD doesn't get funding, autism does. So people push for an autism diagnosis if they're ADHD, because then they actually get the support. And ultimately, it's not always the label that they want. It's the label that then opens the avenue for the support and the funding they need to get the support. And that's the biggest reason for getting a label and a diagnosis, is to access services. I have had so many clients and so many people say, this is the diagnosis that the pediatrician gave me. I don't think that's correct. I think it's this, this, and this. And I feel like as a society, we're slowly working towards understanding and accepting self-diagnoses. And it can be very controversial, especially because, people train for years to be able to concretely, diagnose people. It is a gift. It is a talent that takes a lot of time to curate. And I 100% acknowledge and respect that. But at the end of the day, we are the experts on ourselves. And if we're only presenting that duck on the top of the water to our, diagnostic team, they're going to be like, you're a great duck, you float beautifully, I don't see a problem. Because the other factor is a lot of neurodivergent people are very perfectionistic, and we are also very people pleasers. We want to do things well. It gives us anxiety to not know the answer or to be seen in a certain way. So we kind of have developed this mask and this ability to kind of be a chameleon to adjust our social skills and the way we behave based on how other people behave. And often people will say, oh, yeah, I had no idea you were neurodivergent. I can't believe it. To me, that screams, I've done a great job. I put on a brilliant performance. And, it's not even, we do it so often and so well that we're not even really aware of it. And sometimes they're the things that we stop and go, why am I so tired? Like, I just have a banging headache. And I need to be in a room by myself or in the car, just put some tunes on. I just need to zone out for a bit, put some trashy TV, that kind of thing. And there's a reason for that. But it's not normalized, it's not spoken about in society, and it's not seen as part of our mental health, and we need to do those sorts of things. That's actually really beneficial, and we've only just started to work towards, you know, accepting crying, so we're slowly getting there, but yeah, it's a process.
Slowly but surely, and this is, I suppose, another piece of evidence that as a community that we are an oppressed group. Because another, I suppose, part of the graphic that I shared on Instagram was that, and it was moderately similar in the UK, Ireland, Europe, and even the United States, is that up until, was it 2008, it was a slightly earlier here, slightly earlier, but not by much, is that those over the age of 18, up to around between 2005, 2010, depending where you are, could not be diagnosed autistic or ADHD. It was only for children.
Yes, which is why we believe that people grew out of it. So therefore, when we met people who, and which is, it just blows my mind, because the average age of females getting diagnosed with ADHD is 30. So if that's the average age, and that's beyond what the DSM was diagnosing, you know, over 12 years ago, 13 years ago. My math is appalling. So we have to account for that, because then what often we experience, especially as health professionals, people say to us, well, what's the evidence base? Where's the evidence? And I'd love to say, here's all the evidence. I've got a beautiful big box of it. Let's talk about it. But in actual fact, we weren't even diagnosing it. So how can we have evidence of strategies if we're not even diagnosing it in the first place until 2008? So and this is why it's so important to have forums like this where there's lived experience shared. So rather than going to the psychiatrist that you're going to see once a year for all their advice and all their tips, even though, you know, they only maybe know 10 minutes of your life story, or, you know, maybe in the best circumstances, a few hours of it, we kind of expect them to fill in the blanks for us. But in actual fact, that's not really that beneficial. And instead, we need to, you know, amplify neurodivergent voices and hear what we have to say, because that is where the wisdom lies. That's where the quality of care lies. And I think so many people that do work in our industry do support neurodivergent people, whether they're aware of it or they're not, are also neurodivergent. There's a reason why they have so much success with their clients. And it's really interesting, especially being a mentor of other therapists, seeing that journey with them, and they can't quite articulate why it worked, or they can't quite articulate why that client really understands them, or they really understand that client. And it's a process, and it's a journey that everyone goes on at a different speed, and, you know, it just takes the time that it takes. But having that insight of what it actually is just saves such a mental load. We aren't, you know, catastrophizing and thinking about all the what ifs. We're able to concretely be like, okay, this is why. It makes sense.
I am going to throw a question in, which is very, very relevant. And it came through to Instagram just before it came on air. And I was thinking, oh, I'm glad this didn't come on live, because I would have a hell of a lot to say about it. And this live stream would go from maybe between 45 minutes and an hour to about 7 hours of a foul-mouthed rant. So this is the question, and I believe it comes from Kathy. I apologize, Kathy, if I've got your name wrong. And here is the question. It is, what are your thoughts on in-person observations for ND kids?
So again, diagnostic professionals, we are trained to see. That is our normal. We see it so easily because that's all we see most of the time at work. It's actually really hard to spot neurotypical for people that work in the diagnostic space and people who are neurodivergent. It's like a radar. We can kind of pick them up in a crowd. Oh, yep, there he is. Yep, oh, yep. And a lot of the time when we find out, you know, celebrities might, you know, say, oh, by the way, I'm ADHD. A lot of the time the neurodivergent community go, yeah, we knew. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, we knew. Like, it's not rocket science for us. And so in person can be really valuable depending on the context, depending on the time, depending on the purpose. If that observation is being used for diagnostic purposes, it needs to be backed with lots of other information. So we want to do, you know, questionnaires. We would want to do cognitive assessments, language assessments. We would want to do a very comprehensive analysis. It's not a once-off, observation that day for 2 hours, they didn't tick any of the autistic boxes or the OCD boxes or whatever, neurodivergent box they want to put someone in. So in terms of, it has its place, because what else have we got? And, I've definitely had clinicians that have said, oh, I just recommended the mum film the kids. Just film the kid when they're being autistic. And that's just, one, it's not really dignified. No one really wants to have a meltdown and be filmed by a caretaker or a family member. That's horrible. And secondly, it's not that beneficial, because when we all reach a certain point, our nervous systems are all triggered and all present similarly. That doesn't mean that we are or aren't neurodivergent. It doesn't, just because our coping mechanisms don't work, we don't develop our frontal lobe until we're 25. So anybody before the age of 25 that's having, a massive meltdown or tantrum, yeah, fair enough, and it can be over something as simple as the Wi-Fi not working. That's frustrating. And so, and it's interesting because people expect, but he should be over it by now. And it's like, you seem more frustrated than they are. They've moved on. You're the one with it on your phone and trying to point and show everyone to try and justify how you're feeling. And I think sometimes we have to look at our own rigid beliefs, and sometimes our own rigid beliefs around whether something's good or something's bad actually comes from our own internalized ableism, but also potentially some of that autism ourselves. We believe that this is wrong, this is right, I will argue this to the death. That's because it gives us the dopamine, makes us feel in control, makes us feel comfortable, and that has its place too.
Thank you for articulating that in a few minutes, because do you know what I thought when I saw the question before coming on air? I was nearly going to broadcast out to everybody and people listening to it. Do you know what to do? Pause this episode, go and get a bottle of Prosecco or coffee or whatever, and just sit down, and you're going to listen to my foul-mouthed rant for 3 hours that I'll have to issue a public apology for afterward. But I would have started it, to be fair with, do observations have a place? Yes, I agree with you, but this comes from reports that I get back, and I took a couple of them down for the purposes of this, right, of observations that the parents reported back to me. Number one, the child's special interest wasn't obscure enough, was number one. The child wasn't lining things up. Okay. The child had made conversation with more than 2 people in the room, and the child maintained eye contact for more than 5 seconds. Now, this is nearly what, particularly in this part of the world, for an observation, that if you're not a liner-upper who's looking at their shoes and not talking to anybody and with headphones on and rose-tinted glasses on, then you're not autistic, and that's it. Because here's a revelation that I've discovered. Are you ready for this?
Yes.
Guess what? There are some autistic children who like school. Can you believe that?
Yeah, they thrive in it.
Some like school. So how the hell do we run here? So the special interest, obsessive and repetitive, this thirst for knowledge. So we go for a place that has knowledge on tap. And because we're doing okay in this thirst for knowledge on tap facility called school, then we're somehow not autistic. It's bonkers. The whole system has set us up to fail, because if we don't meet the antiquated stereotypes, we're not autistic. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never met anybody ever who's believed themselves or their child to be autistic or ADHD and been wrong. It just doesn't happen. It's like the prime example of famous people coming out as autistic and or ADHD, like our old friend Tyson Fury, this big excitable boxer who speaks openly about erratic behavior, problems with substance misuse, and so on and so forth. And whenever Tyson Fury was like, I'm ADHD, everybody was like, you? No, never. Like, nobody ever, there were no comments under the hundreds of thousands of comments that were like, you? Really? I would never have thought. Yeah. But it seems to be praised and lauded whenever individuals of a certain following come out as autistic and ADHD. but there's a certain stigma where it's almost as if we're descending into a horrible world of social hierarchy when it comes to autism and ADHD. It's quite sad. Maybe one day I'll have a better view of the world and a more positive one. But as far as observations, I know that there is a place for them. There has to be some sort of clinical guideline. But my thought is, whenever LGBTQIA plus was very, very stigmatized back in the 60s, the 70s, and 80s, what some clinicians did say, particularly with boys, is, oh, they mustn't be gay because they're not effeminate enough.
Yeah.
Now, that's abhorrent and vile to say now. But what's the difference between that and what some observers say now? Oh, that child's not lining things up. They mustn't be autistic.
Yeah, I also love the comparison between left and right-handers, because, you know, back in the day, everyone needed to write with their right hand. They were whipped, they were hit until they used their right hand. The second that the punishments would, you know, they got rid of them in the school system, there was an increase in left-handers. What? How can this be an epidemic of left-handers? And it's like, no, we've just taken off the oppressive systems that keep us in this tiny little box and really impact our self-esteem and our health, to being like, yeah, we're here, we've always been here, and I actually just want some help. And there's nothing wrong with that. So it's not as if there was like an epidemic of left-handers, just like there was an epidemic of like, oh, these people are coming out with the, you know, with their preferred sexualities and their preferred pronouns. Oh my gosh, it's you know, getting so bad or so dangerous or whatever language they use. It's like, no, people are proud to be themselves, and that is awesome. That is worth celebrating every day of the week.
It is. Do you know what's interesting though? Is that none of the governments around the world said, "Oh, it's becoming awfully trendy to be left-handed." Every Tom, Dick, and Harry is coming out as left-handed and stuff like this. And it's the newest social, fashionable trend, identity diagnostic, whatever you want to call it. So this is how we are an oppressed group. So neurodivergent adults couldn't be diagnosed as adults until, we're not going to cry about 5 years, depending where you are in the world, 2005 to 2010. So now when more people are coming forward, these people, because biology dictates we grow up, and oh, there's a lot of autistic and ADHD about. And then the powers that be are saying, oh, there's too many. There's too many. And I mean, it's victim blaming. We are somehow now entitled, even though we technically were entitled. We were entitled to mental health care and diagnostics and knowledge of our identity earlier in life that we didn't get. And now that we're getting it, there's too many. There's too many people coming forward, where I am really struggling at the minute with the ADHD and autism as fashionable thing at the minute, because I got that in a Q&A at a live event where they said things like, the actual question, note for note, that I got was, do you feel somehow responsible for contributing to this trend of autism and the ADHD?
That's infuriating. I always bring it back to like bra size, and I think, like, as a woman, most women can understand what it's like trying to squeeze into the wrong bra size. Like, it might be the most beautiful, expensive piece of lingerie, and we really want to wear it, but it is digging into us. It is so uncomfortable. Is it a loss to get told this is your actual bra size? Like, I'm so sorry that those 10 A's that are in your drawer, those 32 A's in your drawer aren't going to fit you. You need to mourn the loss of that and actually focus on your true size. And, you know, for gents, often we use shoe size as a comparison. Is your life detrimentally impacted because you're not a size 6 shoe? No, you're just able to understand that that's the shoe you need to get the support to do the daily things you need to do. You don't even think about it. It's you're not disabled because your shoe is even harder to find than other shoes. There's ways around it, and we naturally adapt so beautifully with some aspects of our life as society. But unfortunately, we're not there yet in terms of neurodivergence. But if we can get there in terms of these other areas of our lives, I'm really, really hopeful that we will get there.
And we will. It's getting better. I would love it to go at a more rapid pace. That
definitely.
and you see a lot of harmful information out there, especially when it comes to labeling and identity. There is people that genuinely believe that this is just somehow this quirky trend. And if you're listening to this and you're wondering, why am I different? Get the answer to the question, because it's life changing. We're partnered with a diagnostic clinic, and I spoke to somebody, and I know I'm live, so I'm trying to protect anonymity as much as possible. But this person was a billionaire, and I got speaking to them, and we sat down, and it was, why am I different? Why am I never happy? Why did my marriages fall apart? Why do my friends think I'm intense? And so on and so forth. And went through the diagnostic process and was diagnosed ADHD. And it was transformative. It was completely transformative. And this person was in their 50s, I think.
Yeah, and we hear stories like this all the
validation.
time. And I find that neurotypical people seem to understand a lot of analogies in terms of, it's like figuring out what language everyone else is speaking. If we understand that everyone else is speaking Arabic and we only speak English, it makes sense why we don't understand them. It's not as if we're like, what are you saying? And we're screaming, and we're yelling, we're doing gestures, we're writing things down. We're able to be like, it's a different language. Okay, cool. Well, that's what I need to learn how to do when we get on with it. Things like, I'm a zebra amongst horses. Why does everyone else not have stripes? We have a really cool kids book called Elmer, and it's a story about an elephant. That's every elephant's grey, and that elephant has patchworks of different colours. And sometimes these conversations around neurodiversity can actually start with these types of kid books. It doesn't need to be explicit from the start if it's not comfortable for you. If you feel like, I know there's a kid in their class or a kid that they interact with who has neurodivergence, I don't want to explicitly say this because I don't want to say the wrong thing, or, sometimes it can be quite controversial in that way. But identify that the sensitivity is actually coming from your own anxiety most of the time, not necessarily the other person or the neurodivergent person's anxiety. And sometimes just asking the question, like, is it okay if I call it autistic, or would you prefer you're a person with autism? Like, what are your preferred ways of describing it? Do you prefer profoundly autistic, or are you just saying autistic? Like, I just don't know, because that just changes the conversation so significantly. And you'll notice that all of a sudden you build respect and you build this comfortable understanding of, help me learn. I'm coming from a place of care. And I'm not here to judge. I genuinely just want to understand what makes the most sense for you, because everyone's different. And, we're able to acknowledge, especially with autism, oh, yes, it's a spectrum. Right, spectrum. Everyone's different. But that's actually the case for all neurodivergence, whether it's schizophrenia or whether that's OCD or Tourette. We have fluctuating capacity. You might see me on a Monday and I might be stuck in bed, unable to move, refuse to eat breakfast. But then you might see me on Thursday and I've vacuumed the house and I've mopped. But both are still part of my identity. It's not as if my autism starts or stops, or my ADHD starts and stops. It's all just part of the picture.
Okay, I have a couple of questions now that have come in. Now, anybody that's here on the live stream, just put them in the chat in the comments. But whenever I had shared beforehand the broadcast, I did get a couple. And here's a nice one. I don't know if it's too broad, but we'll put it up anyway. And it's from Barry. And it's typically 2 questions. So, what age can a child start occupational therapy, and how can it help?
So occupational therapy can start from newborn. So basically what it looks like in the early intervention space is we're supporting them to achieve the milestones that are foundational for future learning. So what we're starting to do now is work more proactively with people. So rather than wait until they're experiencing burnout, they're having all these significant social challenges, we're able to identify, okay, this baby is not responding to their name being called, or this baby is not looking at me all the time. And identifying that is a difference. It is a cognitive, it is a social difference. So they can access therapies and supports but normalize it for the parents. The parents not thinking there's something wrong with my kid. Every other kid in the parent group is crawling, and my kid is just sitting there like a potato. Like, and that causes that parent anxiety, which therefore makes the child anxious, which also impacts development and behavior, and ultimately that parent-child relationship. So what we really want to do is we want to facilitate an understanding of how to best support that child to reach as much of those foundational learning as possible. And what often we talk about in the world of OT is kind of like the pyramid of learning. And so if we don't have those strong foundations of sensory regulation, executive functioning skills, emotional regulation, they're not going to be able to learn their numbers. They're not able to learn to write. They're not going to be able to be an Olympic athlete because they don't have the persistence. They don't have those foundational skills. So rather than waiting for it to get to a certain point or a certain crisis, we're seeing a lot more proactive approach. And that's better for the client and it's better for the families.
Good answer. And I didn't know that. I didn't think as a rule of thumb that occupational therapy could start at newborn. I thought, certain things like whether it's diagnostics or things like that. In some areas, I know it can be different, but that's really helpful to know, and especially how it can help, because I found, and this is totally for my learning too, is that everybody has heard of occupational therapy, but what exactly is it? And that's a fantastic answer. So Barry, I hope that's helped. And you know what? It's never a Jude Morrow show if there's not a juicy question. So I will put this up and I will go ahead with it. And it is, and this is a good one, I think, is using the identity paradigm diminishing disability. My son has significant learning disabilities and cannot advocate for himself on social media and broadcast. And that's from Sylvia. Now, if you don't mind, Claire, I want to go on this first. And I want to take this opportunity to say, like I've said a million times, despite what mainstream media says, I have never, ever said, ever, that autism and ADHD are not disabilities. I have never said that. If you find a quote for that from me, either recorded or in print, what I will do is I will get a fedora that I got at the Grand National in 2012, which is upstairs. I will put it in front of me, put on my camera, add a nice liberal dosing of chili sauce, and I will eat it live on air, because I've never said that, ever. I have never said that. And I will keep saying that until people stop saying, well, Jude Morrow says that autism and ADHD aren't disabilities. I will keep saying it until I'm literally blue in the face. So for my take on this, before passing over to Claire, is I don't think it diminishes disability at all, where some people, regardless of their identity, still experience some more challenges than others. And I can totally get Sylvia, and we've spoken about this on the phone actually several years ago, because I'm remembering this now off the top of my head, if you're the same person I'm thinking of, is even though your son experiences profound challenges in life, it still doesn't diminish strengths and positives that the identity can still bring, where everybody, regardless of ability, can bring joy to their own lives and the lives of others around them, despite the challenges. That's what way I see it. And as far as reducing stigma, that's ultimately the mission that we want to do. Yes, are there going to be people in the community that experience more challenges than others? Yes, there is. I suppose that's where the spectrum does come into it. But what I don't want, and this isn't perpetuated by any of us in the community, is some form of elitism, as in, oh, neurodiversity is for the cool, quirky skydiving people, and anything outside of that is not. That's not what we're saying. Neurodiversity is for absolutely everybody. And is using the identity paradigm diminishing disability? In my opinion, no. And it's never been that way. So that's my little rant over. Claire, over to you. What are your thoughts?
I love that. I'm similar in terms of it has its place, and it definitely is a disability, full stop. It's not isn't or isn't. However, we have the right as people, as part of the neurodivergent community, to use the language we need to get the point across. So we may need to use more deficit-based language to access the funding and access the services we need, compared to I'm talking to my friend about my child and I just want to acknowledge them as the person that they are. Both can be true. I can say he really struggles with articulating his emotions, has massive outbursts, so that they can access, emotional support, so they can access OT, so they can access speech therapy. But in the same stretch, I can say, oh, it was really great how he told me to change the TV channel to, Natural Geographic or something like that. So I think both can be true, because we know that neurodivergents have such fluctuating abilities, and it comes back to the purpose. As an OT and someone who constantly writes letters for funding and for supports, I actually have a paragraph at the start of all my reports saying this report, the goal of this report is to gain funding. Therefore, I am highlighting the significant deficits that this person is experiencing, because this is the way the system is set up. Not because there's anything wrong with the person, but the system, I have to follow the rules. Whether I agree or disagree, it's a fight for another day. I'm not in a current position in Parliament, in leadership, in the government to make those calls. So within that, I have to say, this is what I'm able to say, but I'm going to put my disclaimer. So that way, if that report is read by a teacher or by a family member who's not reading it with the idea of getting funding, that they understand why it's written the way it's written, and it doesn't take away any of the strengths that they have, because there's nothing worse, especially as a neurodivergent person myself, to read a report about yourself. It sounds horrific. Like, who wants to read a report about all your flaws and deficits? Like, I don't care what where you sit in the neurodiversity paradigm. It ultimately is so horrible and uncomfortable. No one wants to do that. In Australia, it's a $2,000 report, which is called a functional capacity assessment. And we write about their capacity to do absolutely every activity of daily living. And based off that is how they fund it. So to read a report of all the things that they're maximal assistance, and they can't do this, they need a support worker for that, that's so horrible. No one wants to read that, but yet that's what they need to access the funding. So it depends on the systems and the reasons, and it doesn't take away the fact that we think highly of our loved ones or we think highly of ourselves. It's just identifying that there is a purpose for why we use the language we use, and it's also looking at not defaulting to deficit-based language, and that's what we have done. We've defaulted to deficits and impairments and disability, but we can now use them as objective terms. It's a disability, full stop. It doesn't have to be a negative or a positive. It just is. It's like autism. No, it just is autism. Yeah, that's it.
Totally, because and Sylvia, I think I may have told you this before, you may have shared it if you've been following on the channels and on the show a long time. Periodically, Claire, and I don't know if you've ever got a message like this, but I have got many of them now at this point, where I have had parents reach out to me and say, Jude, can you please stop doing what you're doing and showcasing what you're doing? Because if the wider public think you're what autism is, then my child won't get any help.
We've still got a lot more work to do then. We actually need to do more work, not less.
Yeah, of course, because I mean, I wake up sometimes every day looking up at my ceiling, at my light fixture, and think, why the hell am I doing this? Why do I even bother? I mean, I'm shouting into a vacuum all the time. Of course, the little ones keep me going. I mean, of course, that's what keeps me going. But I got that again about a month ago, and I hadn't got one for nearly a year. But that's the way parents can be hardwired to think, where it's like, oh no, they're doing a bad thing. They're doing a bad thing. But
and again, it comes back to their potential autism and their potential traits. We know it's very hereditary, and we also know this all or nothing thinking is very neurodivergent. So if they're coming at it from a this is bad, there's a lot of grey area in there. And if you aren't able to pick the grey area, guess what? That's also a trait. You should probably go and explore that. Do you know what I mean?
I do say that, and as I say to everybody, not just directly to you, Sylvia, but in general, where these quirky little apples have to fall from somewhere. And even the ones that are very, very anti-Jude Morrow, the people that look on their Instagram every day and think, okay, today's the day that Jude Morrow's parachutes don't open. There's just going to be a hole in the ground. Where that obsessive, repetitive kind of thinking, where it's like, look in the mirror, where, I mean, some trolls are relentless. Some, at this stage, there's some of them I really admire. It's like, you have done everything to put me down and upset me the last 6 or 7 years. What drives you? Like, I mean, surely you need to look at yourself. And I did say that to a couple, and it was the worst thing I could have possibly said to them. But no, but thank you for the question, Sylvia. Here's an exciting one. I like this one too. And it's, I suppose, not a controversial topic, is it? My daughter, 9 and at mainstream school, struggles with danger awareness. How can I ensure dopamine levels are met whilst keeping them safe? From Brianna, from Bri. Hi, Bri.
So safety always comes first. Safety is paramount. And especially with things like danger awareness, this comes with so many layers. We've got things like cyber safety now, not just road safety. We've got stranger danger. And it's actually very nuanced. The more that we start to look into things like stranger danger, we realize, oh no, but you should go and talk to that strange police officer if you need help. But they're a stranger, and that very rigid understanding of expectations. But 1 minute I can't talk to a stranger, and the next minute that's my best thing to do. Like, that doesn't make sense. There's a lot going on here, and basically, in order to promote safety in the moment, we do whatever we can. If that's grabbing the child to move them away from the road, that's what we do. If it's grabbing the knife to put the knife away, that's what we do. If it's turning the oven off because they're, playing with their appliance, that's what we do. But the next thing that we do, which is what people forget, is we actually teach them these skills when they're regulated. So when they have as much dopamine as possible, when they're in a space where they feel safe, they're with a trusted adult, and they're actually able to maintain that attention to understand it, we can show them videos, we can talk them through it. And neurodivergent people, we are very curious. We really just want to know why. Why does this do this? Why does that do that? And they really want to understand. But if what's hot, how hot is hot? I want to experience that. Having those in-depth discussions and explanations is really important. And so for some reason, we think that kids aren't privy to the why. It's like, oh, but because I said so, they should just follow because I said so. But no, that's actually not how neurodivergent brains work. As much as we love to trust other people, we also know that other people are constantly gaslighting us because they're telling us that we're fine, when I'm trying my very best to explain I'm not fine. So how can I then trust you when you're saying this stove is hot? Explain to me what's wrong with finding out that it's hot. Like, explain to me that it's going to create a sore, that it's going to hurt, that it's going to cause me pain. I may need to get a bandage, or I may need to go to hospital. That will then take me away from my home. Like, we actually do need to go through each of the sequences of what are the impacts. And if there's a particular danger that we see more often, what we like to do is create more of like a story of what that is. So not around what we would expect, but kind of like a holistic picture. So everyone wants to cross the road safely. What does that look like? One of my favorite stories actually is there was a autistic advocate, and she was, I can't remember her name off the top of my head, but this was like 10 years ago. She basically came out and said, one of the biggest things that people do wrong is they tell people to look for cars when they cross the road, right? They say, look for cars. There's cars everywhere. They're parked. There's some moving. There's some, like, what do you want me to do about looking at the cars? I've looked at 12. Okay, now what? We're literal thinkers. We are explicit learners. So take us away from the road. Take us away from the situation where we're feeling safe, where we're feeling comfortable, whether that be in our bedrooms or our swing or wherever is our safe space, and talk us through it. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's also, I love the analogy of, being in the car and being stuck in traffic is not the time to learn how to use Google Maps. Google Maps will help, It will always
I
help,
say
but it
this
doesn't.
all the time, and I would have loved to have been the knight in shining armor and said, that's who it was that said it. But I saw this, where it's like, why is this happening? Where for road safety, look for the cars, and now I can't remember either. I'm so disappointed. But
Sorry.
that's exactly right. Where show beforehand, it's not live and in real time. I just wanted to put the more context comment up. It's climbing, running, jumping off high things, thrill seeker. I'm more timid and not a risk taker, Brianna. Well, Brianna, unfortunately, I like skydiving. My mum and dad hate the idea of it. They think it's the worst thing in the world ever, but it meets my sensory need and seemingly always has. So yeah, that's since I started it. So it's, look, your little one is just seemingly a thrill seeker, where there are things like extreme sports, which are safe, which might be your idea of hell, but it might be her idea of heaven. And you just need to embrace it. I'm sorry, you might have a little bungee jumping child, which might sound like your idea of hell, but if it helps her regulate, get the dopamine hit that she so needs, then why the hell not?
Yeah,
I hope
that's
that
it.
answers your question. So I suppose this does bring us to the end. Claire, I have really loved this conversation, and I would say if this was a completely and utterly non-time restricted live stream, we would probably be here for about 48 hours,
Yeah,
talking and
definitely.
talking and talking and talking about it. And I suppose my last question is to you: have you any final nuggets of gold or pieces of advice that you would want to give to people listening to this?
I feel like one of the best things to understand is, especially for parents, is let your child teach you how to be the best parent that they need rather than the parent that you think you should be. Because that's actually a lot of neuronormative and societal pressures that we've gained from how we were parented, from the media, from all these external, sources. But our kids are actually really good teachers, and they actually want us to succeed as parents, and they will ask and communicate and teach us how to best support them. It's when we're constantly putting in the boundaries because we think we should, because it's gonna help. If you're constantly hitting roadblocks and you feel like things aren't working, try something different. And sometimes it's as simple as following along with the kid. But sometimes that power imbalance is what's unsettling for parents. And that's because of their own nervous system. And that's actually their issue. It's got nothing to do with the child. So I think that is actually going to change the next generation, and it's going to change, society for neurodivergent people if they're raised to know that we can ask for help, we can advocate for ourselves, but we can't do that if we're constantly around parents and people that are telling us what we need, what we want, and how we should behave.
Totally. And that is a great final word. Basically, follow your child's lead and let them advocate for their needs, and meet those needs as much as you possibly can, even if it involves thrill seeking or an idea of something that you might find terribly uncomfortable. But Claire, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to everybody who's watched this. And don't forget to like and subscribe our @Neurodiversity YouTube channel, where all the live streams for the upcoming episodes of Neurodiversity Global B. Don't forget to leave your comments, reviews, and everything else, all the marketing and SEO bits, the plugs that I have to give at the end and possibly the start and during every episode. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Claire, thank you so much again. I look forward to keeping in touch and following everything that you're doing. And for everybody that's watched and listened, thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of the day, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thanks.